Some of the environment offenses and prescribed penalties are here under. The first category is in environment and social impact assessments and audits. If one fails to conduct an environment and social impact assessment or environment risk assessment for projects that require environment and social impact assessments or risk assessments, will attract a fine not exceeding 1 billion Uganda shillings for individuals, or 15 years in prison for those who don't prefer fines, and Uganda shillings 6 billion for corporate bodies. In other words, if you are a factory and you've started your factory without an environment and social impact assessment, the law requires that you are jailed up to 15 years in jail. But should you not opt for a jail sentence, we are saying you should be able to pay a fine not exceeding 1 billion Uganda shillings if you are an individual, or a fine not exceeding 6 billion Uganda shillings if you are a company. Now, under the law, you have a choice. You can opt for prosecution or opt for a fine. So we are making it easy, but at the same time protecting the environment. Failure to conduct an annual audit. Again, this is a common breach. After you've established your project, you are supposed to conduct an environment audit every year. Now, should a company fail to conduct an environment audit, it will be liable to pay a penalty of up to 1 billion Uganda shillings or going to jail for 15 years. Same applies to failure to display the certificate of approval. Every project is supposed to display a certificate of approval in a conspicuous place, so that when our inspectors come, they are able to say this facility is environmentally compliant. And if the certificate is not displayed, you will be liable again to pay a fine. Destroying or damaging or disturbing wetlands in a manner likely to have adverse effects, you will be liable to pay an express penalty of 3 million, depending on the nature of damage. Waste management, leaving rubbish outside the residential premises. This is a common problem. If you leave rubbish outside your residential premises, you are liable to pay 6 million Uganda shillings. If you litter from a commercial building, again, you are also liable to pay 6 million. For example, these shopping arcades or malls or any other commercial building. If we find you are littering or you are not disposing your waste properly, you will be given an invoice for 6 million Uganda shillings. If you dispose waste on a roadside, you've seen this one, throwing around the, maize cobs and the meat sticks or bottles. You drink your soda and then through the window of your car, you drop a bottle. That one will attract a fine of up to 6 million Uganda shillings. These are maximum fines. So depending on the gravity of the breach, it could be lower. But the worst case, the maximum fine is 6 million. Depositing rubbish in a river, stream, lake, or channel, again attracts a fine, a maximum fine of up to 6 million Uganda shillings. Littering from cars or driving a car without a dustbin. We are reading these things from the law. They are not from NEMA. These things are extracted from the law. I want you to tell the public, it's a criminal offense to drive your car without a dustbin, because that's what leads to littering. If you have a car and it does not have a dustbin, if we get you, we shall give you an invoice, depending on the circumstance, of up to 6 million Uganda shillings. Again, like I said, the fine is a choice. It's a voluntary choice. Should you feel like not paying a fine, you opt for a custodial sentence. You go to jail. So it is a choice. It is a choice. This is a voluntary choice. It's a voluntary scheme, just like the traffic offences scheme. You can choose not to pay a fine and go for prosecution. So it's the same thing here. Management of plastics, importing, exporting, manufacturing, or using plastic carrier bags or plastic products made of polymers and propylene that are below 30 microns will attract a fine of 100 million. If you are engaged in a manufacture and trade of plastics below the 30 microns required by law, you are liable to pay a fine of up to 100 million. Now, the reason we are coming up with these administrative schemes, we believe that financial instruments are actually more deterrent in nature than the ordinary criminal justice system. A company will understand more in terms of balance sheet to be able to establish internal mechanisms and processes to protect the environment, because the balance sheet affects the profits. You cannot do a business that is not profitable, would you? So if your business is not profitable, you cannot do it. So you cannot engage in trade of environmentally dangerous materials if you are not going to make profit over it. So that's the new dimension in enforcement of environmental laws. Pollution, dealing in activities that result in aggravated pollution or polluting the environment contrary to conditions contained in a pollution control license or permit. Discharging pollutants into the environment contrary to standards will attract a fine of up to 6 billion Uganda shillings, depending on the circumstance. So polluting companies, factories, you are liable to a fine of up to 6 billion Uganda shillings. These fines are established within the National Environment Act. They are legislated by the Parliament of Uganda and they are legally binding. So it's not concocted figures or arbitrarily determined figures. No, they are legislated under the laws of Uganda. Emitting noise in excess of the permissible noise levels will attract a maximum fine of 10 million Uganda shillings. 10 million, noise pollution. The maximum penalty under this scheme is 10 million. If you opt for prosecution, it is much higher. If you opt for prosecution, the fine is much higher, or you go for a custodial sentence. So this penalty scheme is actually reducing on how much one is liable if you went through a protracted court system. So these are just examples, but a full schedule of breaches and corresponding maximum fees and bank accounts where to pay will be made available on the NEMA website and can be obtained by you, which have a whole range of the offenses and corresponding fines. These are just a few examples, but the list is very long. NEMA retains the right to suspend operations of a facility, to withdraw the license, or the environment and social impact assessment certificate earlier issued or permit or any other relevant documentation, and we also retain the right to commence prosecution until the fine is paid. Like I said, a person who doesn't prefer a voluntary fine will be subject to prosecution and imprisonment, and or both. When you go to court, there are two things. The court can impose the same fine that we are talking about or more, plus a custodial sentence or a jail sentence. So this scheme is purely voluntary, and we call upon the general public to strictly observe environment best practices to avoid these penalties. But if you do not live responsibly, then you should be able to be liable to pay a fine under what we call the polluter pay principle. You must have heard about the polluter pay principle. He who pollutes must clean up. So these monies are meant to go into the National Environment Fund to clean up the mess occasioned by polluters.